Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. A journey of independence begins. 12-year-old Madison Taylor had always lived a life beyond the ordinary. As the daughter of the nation's president and a renowned human rights lawyer, her world was a kaleidoscope of grandeur, constant scrutiny, and monumental expectations. However, amidst the flashing cameras and formal galas, Madison craved the simpler, quieter moments of her childhood, those rare occasions when she could just be herself, away from the weight of her family's legacy. Today was one such moment, a significant day that she had both anticipated and feared. For the first time in her life, Madison was flying alone. The idea had been proposed by her parents as a way to teach her responsibility and independence. She was traveling to visit her best friend, Clara, in a neighboring state, a trip she had been looking forward to for weeks. To Madison, this wasn't just about visiting Clara, it was about proving to herself and her parents that she could navigate the world on her own. The day began early, with Madison waking up to the golden rays of the morning sun streaming through her bedroom window. Her mother helped her pack the final few items into her carry-on bag, a sleek navy suitcase that had been a gift from her father for this very occasion. It bore the initials MT embroidered in silver thread, a small but meaningful reminder of her individuality. "Remember, sweetheart," her mother said, kneeling to meet Madison's gaze, "this isn't just about the trip. It's about showing yourself that you're capable of handling whatever comes your way. Trust yourself, follow the plan, and don't hesitate to ask for help if you need it." Madison nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of excitement and nerves. "I've got this, Mom. You'll see." Her father appeared in the doorway, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his expression a blend of pride and concern. "We're just a call away, Maddie," he reminded her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're smart, resourceful, and stronger than you know." The drive to the airport was uneventful, the car cutting through the bustling city streets as Madison stared out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of anticipation. The airport loomed ahead, a sprawling hub of activity that seemed both familiar and daunting. She had been here countless times before, always flanked by her parents and their security detail. But today, for the first time, she was stepping into this world on her own. As they pulled up to the terminal, Madison's parents embraced her tightly, their goodbyes laced with words of encouragement. She felt a pang of longing as she watched them drive away, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of determination. This was her moment, and she was ready for it. Madison walked into the airport, her carry-on trailing behind her. The terminal was alive with the hum of activity, the rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases, the distant echo of announcements over the PA system, and the murmur of travelers engaged in hurried conversations. She took a deep breath, steeling herself as she approached the check-in counter. The airline representative, a kind-faced woman with warm eyes, greeted her with a smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" Madison handed over her documents, her hand steady, despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I'm here to check in for my flight," she said confidently. The woman glanced at Madison's passport and ticket, her eyebrows lifting slightly as she read the name. Madison was used to that reaction. People often recognized her last name, though they rarely said anything outright. The woman nodded approvingly, processing the information before handing back her documents. "You're all set. Have a great trip." Madison smiled, feeling a small thrill of accomplishment as she made her way toward security. The line was long, but she didn't mind. She took her place among the throng of travelers, observing the people around her. There were business professionals tapping away on their laptops, families trying to corral their energetic children, and solo adventurers like herself, each immersed in their own world of travel. When it was her turn, Madison moved through the security checkpoint with practiced ease. She removed her shoes, placed her bag on the conveyor belt, and walked through the metal detector, the familiar beep signaling that she was good to go. She collected her belongings and headed toward the gate area, her confidence growing with each step. The airport felt like a microcosm of the world, a place where people from all walks of life intersected. Madison loved the energy of it, the sense of purpose and possibility that seemed to hang in the air. As she reached her gate, she found a seat by the window and settled in, pulling out a book to pass the time. But as she read, a nagging thought crept into her mind. She was alone. Truly alone. For the first time, there was no one there to shield her from the unexpected or to guide her through the unknown. The realization was both exhilarating and unnerving. She glanced around the crowded waiting area, her eyes landing on the airline staff at the counter, the passengers chatting in small groups, and the planes taxiing on the runway outside. This was it. She was on her own, navigating a world that was vast and unpredictable. Yet, despite the weight of that realization, Madison felt a spark of determination ignite within her. She wasn't just a passenger on this journey, she was the pilot of her own story, charting a course toward independence and self-discovery. The boarding call came over the loudspeaker, jolting Madison from her thoughts. She gathered her things and joined the line, her heart pounding with anticipation. This was her moment, the first step in a journey that was as much about proving herself as it was about reaching her destination. But as she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, an unexpected obstacle arose. The agent scanned her pass, frowned, and looked up at Madison. "I'm sorry, but there's an issue with your ticket. Could you step aside for a moment?" Madison's heart sank. This wasn't part of the plan. She nodded, her mind racing as she stepped out of line. The agent made a quick phone call, speaking in hushed tones as Madison stood there, clutching her boarding pass tightly. She felt the weight of the passengers' eyes on her, their curiosity palpable. What's going on, she wondered, her confidence wavering. She had prepared for this trip meticulously, following every instruction her parents had given her. But now, faced with an unexpected hurdle, she felt the first flicker of doubt creep in. Little did Madison know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge her resilience, test her courage, and ultimately reveal a strength she never knew she possessed. A moment of doubt. Madison stood to the side of the gate, her small hands gripping the boarding pass like a lifeline. The warm hum of activity that had once been so comforting now felt oppressive. Around her, the passengers continued to board, giving her curious glances as they passed. Each step away from the line made her feel more alone than ever. Her chest tightened with a mix of confusion and anxiety. What could be wrong, she thought. The ticket had been double-checked by her parents. She knew the airline and flight number by heart. Everything was planned perfectly, or so she thought. The gate agent, a tall man with an air of professionalism, spoke into the phone again, glancing at Madison intermittently. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his serious expression made her stomach churn. Questions swirled in her mind like a tornado. Did something happen to her reservation? Was she not allowed to fly alone? Had her identity been flagged? Madison was used to being noticed. After all, the last name Taylor carried weight, it could turn a regular moment into a news headline. Her parents had worked hard to give her a semblance of normalcy, but fame still found ways to intrude. Whether it was reporters lurking outside her school or strangers recognizing her on vacations, Madison had learned early on that being the president's daughter came with both privilege and scrutiny. The tall gate agent finally hung up the phone and walked over to her. His expression softened slightly, but his voice was firm. "I'm sorry, Miss Taylor, but I need to verify some additional information before I can let you board. Can you wait here for a moment?" Madison frowned. "But why? I have my ticket and ID. My parents already confirmed everything." "I understand, but it's a precaution. I'll need you to wait while we sort this out." Precaution. Madison had heard that word before. It was always used in moments when adults decided she needed to be protected. Her mind flashed back to conversations her parents had about safety protocols and special procedures, conversations that always reminded her she was different. Even now, as she stood alone, her sense of independence was being challenged. Taking a deep breath, she tried to stand tall. "Can I call my parents?" she asked. Of course, the agent replied, though his tone made it clear he wasn't expecting much urgency. Madison stepped aside and retrieved her phone from her bag, dialing her mother's number. The phone rang once, twice, and then went to voicemail. Madison swallowed hard, trying her father's phone next. It went straight to voicemail as well. She bit her lip to keep from panicking. Her parents were likely in a meeting or on a call, something that happened all the time. They had promised to be available, but even they couldn't always control their schedules. Her pulse quickened as she sat down on a nearby chair, watching as the last of the passengers boarded the plane. The gate agent kept his distance, but occasionally glanced in her direction. Madison couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched like an anomaly rather than a passenger. "Why is this happening to me?" she muttered under her breath. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a familiar voice. "Excuse me, is there an issue here?" Madison turned her head sharply and saw a woman approaching the gate, none other than Ms. Ava Jenkins, one of her father's security coordinators. Ava was a tall, sharp-eyed woman with jet black hair, tied back into a neat ponytail. Madison recognized her immediately, though she hadn't expected to see her here. Ava was usually behind the scenes, coordinating schedules and ensuring everything ran smoothly for the president's family. Ava approached the gate agent, flashing her identification badge. "Why has Miss Taylor not been allowed to board?" Her tone was firm, professional, and not to be trifled with. The gate agent looked startled. There was a red flag on the reservation. Red flag? This was pre-cleared. "She's traveling alone under approved circumstances," Ava interrupted. "Check your system again. Someone must have made an error." She turned to Madison and offered a reassuring smile. "It's okay, Maddie. We'll get this sorted." Relief washed over Madison as Ava took control of the situation. Within moments, another phone call was made, this time with an urgency that hadn't been there before. Madison listened to the back and forth of voices, feeling both comforted and frustrated. Comforted because Ava's presence reminded her that someone was looking out for her, frustrated because it felt as though, once again, her independence had been overshadowed by her last name. Ava knelt beside her, lowering her voice. "Are you okay? I got word about a potential issue, and I didn't want to take any chances." "I'm fine," Madison replied, though her voice wavered slightly. "But I could have handled it." Ava smiled knowingly. "I know you could have. You're stronger than you realize, Madison. But sometimes, people don't see that, they see your name, your family, and they let assumptions get in the way." She placed a hand on Madison's shoulder. "That's not your fault." The gate agent finally returned, looking apologetic. "Miss Taylor, we've cleared the issue. You're all set to board. I'm very sorry for the delay." Madison stood up, her shoulders back and chin high. "Thank you," she said politely, though she couldn't hide the frustration in her eyes. Ava gave her a nod of approval as she walked toward the jet bridge, her boarding pass finally accepted. As Madison entered the plane, she felt a mix of emotions, pride that she had stayed calm under pressure, but also a lingering disappointment that her solo journey had begun with such a challenge. She found her seat by the window and settled in, clutching her bag tightly. The cabin buzzed with passengers settling into their spots, flight attendants preparing for takeoff, and the steady hum of the engines building in the background. Madison leaned her head against the window, watching the runway stretch out before her. Why does everything have to be so complicated, she wondered silently. For all the talk of independence and responsibility, it seemed as though no one believed she could truly stand on her own, not without someone stepping in to save her. But deep down, she knew she was capable. She had proven it to herself in the way she handled the gate issue, even before Ava arrived. As the plane lifted off the ground, Madison looked out at the vast blue sky, her worries gradually fading with the altitude. She thought about what Ava had said, that people would always see her family first, but that didn't mean she was any less capable of creating her own path. "I'll show them," she thought with determination. "I'll show everyone who I really am." This flight wasn't just a trip to visit a friend. It was a turning point, a journey that was about to teach her more about herself than she could have ever imagined. The flight of reflection. Madison sank deeper into her seat, letting the hum of the airplane engines drown out her lingering frustration. The takeoff had been smooth, the slight pull against her chest a comforting reminder that she was finally airborne. Outside her window, the earth slowly disappeared, replaced by cotton-like clouds stretching across the endless blue sky. For the first time since she'd been pulled aside at the gate, Madison felt like she could breathe. But even as the world below shrank, her thoughts expanded, swirling like a storm. She couldn't stop replaying the moments at the gate, the questioning, the hesitation in the gate agent's voice, the way passengers had stared at her. What do they think of me, she wondered. The feeling of being scrutinized, singled out, made her chest tighten. It reminded her of the school play last year when one of her classmates had whispered, "She's only getting the lead role because she's the president's daughter." No one else had said it out loud, but Madison had felt the unspoken doubts lingering in the air. It didn't matter how hard she worked or how much effort she put into something, people always seemed to assume she got things because of her family. It wasn't fair, but she had no choice but to live with it. Sighing, she leaned her head against the cool window, watching as the sun reflected off the plane's wing. The clouds below looked so peaceful, untouched by the chaos of the world she knew so well. A flight attendant stopped beside her row, smiling warmly. "Hi there, sweetheart. Can I get you something to drink?" Madison blinked out of her thoughts and nodded quickly. "Water, please." As the flight attendant handed her a cup, she paused, tilting her head thoughtfully. "You did really well back there, you know." Madison frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The woman glanced around and lowered her voice. "I was near the gate when they held you back. You didn't lose your cool. A lot of people, adults even, would have panicked, but you stayed calm. That's impressive." Madison's eyes widened. She wasn't sure what to say. Most people never noticed her in that way, they either assumed everything came easily to her or avoided commenting altogether. "Thank you," she replied softly, feeling a flicker of pride. "You're welcome, kiddo," the attendant said, giving her a wink before moving down the aisle. Madison sat back, sipping her water as she processed the compliment. Maybe she had handled the situation well. Sure, Ava had stepped in to clear things up, but Madison had held her ground before that. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't cried. She'd asked questions. It was something her mom had always taught her: when the world doesn't make sense, ask questions. Never let anyone silence your voice. The boy in the seat next to her. The row beside Madison had been empty for the first part of the flight, but as the plane leveled off, a boy about her age appeared. He must have been sitting somewhere else, but moved to an open seat for more space. Madison watched him settle in beside her, dropping a tattered backpack on the floor and pulling out a comic book. "Hi," he said casually, flipping the cover open. "I'm Liam." "Madison," she replied, trying to keep her tone polite but reserved. Liam didn't seem particularly interested in conversation, which was fine by her. He was completely absorbed in his comic, his sneakered feet tapping rhythmically against the floor. Madison sneaked a glance at the colorful pages, which showed a hero soaring through the sky in a red and silver suit. "You like superheroes?" Liam asked suddenly, catching her looking. Madison shrugged. "I guess. I don't read a lot of comics, though." "You should," Liam said matter-of-factly. "They're not just stories about powers. They're about regular people who rise to challenges, no matter what life throws at them." Madison blinked at him. "That's a really thoughtful answer." Liam grinned. "My sister says I talk too much, but I think about stuff a lot." For some reason, Madison felt herself smile, a real, genuine smile. Maybe it was the simplicity of Liam's words, or maybe it was the way he treated her like a normal kid instead of someone special. "What's your favorite superhero, then?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Probably Spider-Man," Liam said without hesitation. "He doesn't come from money or power, you know? He's just a kid trying to do his best." Madison stared at Liam thoughtfully. "He's just a kid trying to do his best." she knew exactly what that felt like. No matter how big her family's name was, she was just Madison, a girl who wanted to prove that she could stand on her own. You know, Liam continued, glancing at her, you kind of look like someone who'd be in a superhero story. Madison tilted her head. What do you mean? I dunno. Like someone who's small but strong, someone who gets underestimated but surprises everyone. Her smile faltered slightly, his words striking deeper than she expected. It was strange how someone she had just met could say something that felt so true. An unexpected reflection. As the flight continued, Madison found herself staring out the window again, her mind buzzing with new thoughts. Small but strong. Underestimated but surprising everyone. That was exactly how she felt. Back at the gate, no one had seen her as capable. The gate agent's doubt, the passengers' whispers, even the airline's confusion, all of it had made her feel invisible in a way she hadn't expected. But despite that, she had handled it. She had stayed calm, stood her ground, and asked for answers. Liam's words echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of things her parents had told her. You're stronger than you realize, Maddie. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone but yourself. You don't have to be perfect to be capable. It was as though all of those thoughts were finally coming together. Maybe her journey wasn't about proving anything to other people. Maybe it was about learning to trust herself, even when others didn't see what she was capable of. The thought brought her a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. The landing, a new beginning. Hours later, as the plane began its descent, Madison braced herself for landing. The rumble of the wheels against the tarmac jolted her back to reality, but something had changed. She didn't feel small or invisible anymore. When the plane came to a stop, Liam grinned at her as he grabbed his backpack. Hey, see you around, superhero girl. Madison couldn't help but smile back. See you, Liam. As she stepped off the plane and into the bustling airport, Madison spotted Clara's family waiting for her. Clara was waving wildly, her grin stretching from ear to ear. Madison's steps felt lighter as she moved toward her friend. She had faced doubt, obstacles, and judgment on this trip, but she had come through it stronger. It wasn't the smooth solo adventure she had imagined, but maybe that made it even more important. This was her journey. And it was just getting started. Unspoken truths and quiet strength. The arrival gate buzzed with activity as Madison stepped into the terminal, her small carry-on trailing behind her. Familiar voices rang out, breaking through the airport din like a bright melody. There she is. Clara's voice carried above the noise, full of excitement and relief. Madison's face broke into a wide smile as she spotted her best friend rushing toward her. Clara was a whirlwind of curls and energy, her arms flailing as she waved enthusiastically. Behind her, Mr. and Mrs. Adams, Clara's parents, waited with warm smiles and open arms. Madison felt a weight lift off her shoulders as she reached Clara, who immediately threw her arms around her. You made it! Clara exclaimed breathlessly, pulling back to look at her friend. We thought you got eaten by a giant plane delay or something. Madison let out a laugh, the tension she'd been carrying finally breaking like a dam. It's a long story, she replied, shaking her head. Let's just say, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Clara gave her a mischievous grin. You'll have to tell me everything later. Deal, Madison promised. Mr. Adams stepped forward and gently patted Madison's shoulder. We're so happy to see you, Madison. Your parents were worried for a moment there, but they called to say everything was sorted out. Come on, we'll get you home and settled in no time. Madison smiled gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Adams. As they made their way to the car, Madison couldn't help but notice how normal everything felt. Clara chatted endlessly about their plans for the next few days, movies, baking cookies, visiting a local park, and even staying up way past bedtime to tell spooky stories. Madison soaked up her friend's chatter like sunlight after a storm. It was exactly what she needed. A quiet moment of reflection. The ride to Clara's house was calm, the scenery outside the car window a soothing blur of greenery and distant houses. Madison watched the passing world in thoughtful silence as Clara continued to talk excitedly beside her. For the first time since she'd boarded the flight, Madison allowed herself to process everything that had happened. She replayed the moment at the gate in her mind, her initial confusion, the stares, the feeling of being treated differently just because of who her family was. And then there were Liam's words, small but strong. Underestimated but surprising everyone. That was the moment everything changed for her. She realized that no matter what assumptions people made about her, good or bad, she was still her own person. The world might see Madison Taylor, the president's daughter, but she was so much more than that. It was strange how such a challenging moment could bring her clarity. Maybe being held back at the gate wasn't a setback, maybe it was a test, one she had passed. She thought back to Ava, the security coordinator who had stepped in at just the right moment. Ava hadn't treated her like a helpless child. She'd spoken to her with respect, understanding that Madison had done her part to remain calm and figure things out on her own. Madison realized she wanted to be like Ava someday, someone who was strong, composed, and able to make things right without ever losing her cool. I can be that, she thought to herself. I will be that. Clara nudged her shoulder suddenly, pulling her out of her thoughts. You're awfully quiet. You okay? Madison blinked and smiled at her friend. Yeah. I'm really okay. Clara tilted her head, skeptical. Are you sure? Because usually you can't stop talking once you get started. Madison laughed softly. I promise, I'm good. Just thinking. Clara grinned. Well, don't think too hard. We have cookies to bake and movies to watch. Home away from home. Clara's house was everything Madison loved, cozy, welcoming, and full of warmth. Unlike the grandeur of the presidential residence, this house felt lived in and real. The smell of chocolate chip cookies wafted through the air, and sunlight streamed through the windows onto a worn family couch. Make yourself at home, Mrs. Adams called from the kitchen, where she was pulling out a fresh batch of cookies. Madison kicked off her shoes and dropped her bag by the stairs, immediately feeling at ease. Clara grabbed her hand and dragged her to the living room, where a blanket fort was already half constructed. You have to help me finish this, Clara said, handing Madison a pillow. Madison grinned and set to work. Within minutes, the two girls had built a fortress worthy of any movie marathon. Inside, it was dark and quiet, the glow of fairy lights casting shadows on the walls. Okay, Clara said, flopping onto a pile of cushions. You have to tell me what happened at the airport. My mom said it was a little mix-up, but you look like you've seen a ghost. Madison sighed, curling up next to her friend. It's complicated. Try me, Clara replied, her voice soft. Madison hesitated for a moment before speaking. They pulled me aside at the gate. I don't know exactly why, maybe because of my name, or because I was traveling alone, but it was like they didn't trust me to handle it. They talked to me like I was a little kid who couldn't take care of herself. Clara frowned. That's not fair. You've done tons of stuff on your own before. I know, Madison said quietly. But sometimes, people just see my last name. They don't see me. It's like I have to work twice as hard to prove I'm capable, and even then, it's not enough. Clara was silent for a moment before speaking again. Well, they're wrong. You're the most capable person I know, Maddie. You didn't need anyone to rescue you, you figured things out yourself. Madison felt a lump form in her throat at Clara's words. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that, how much she needed someone to see her, truly and fully. Thanks, Clara, she whispered. Clara shrugged. What are best friends for? Learning to stand tall. That night, as Madison lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, she thought about everything she'd learned that day. It wasn't just about flying alone or navigating the airport, it was about learning how to stand tall, even when people doubted her. She thought about Liam and his superhero comic, the hero who was underestimated but never gave up. She thought about Ava and her calm strength. And most of all, she thought about herself. She had faced uncertainty, judgment, and frustration, but she hadn't fallen apart. She'd stayed steady. As she drifted off to sleep, Madison made herself a promise. No matter how people see me, I'll show them who I really am. I'll prove to myself that I can handle anything. Her journey wasn't over, it was only beginning. But now, she had a new sense of purpose, and she wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Rising above the shadow. The golden morning sunlight streamed through the guest room window, warming Madison's face as she stirred awake. For the first time in a long time, she felt rested, really rested. The events of the previous day still lingered at the edges of her mind, but the heaviness had lifted. She felt lighter, stronger, like a new version of herself had quietly emerged overnight. Sitting up, she took a moment to take in the stillness of Clara's house. The faint smell of pancakes drifted upstairs, and the muffled voices of Clara and her parents echoed through the hallway. It wasn't loud or overwhelming like home could sometimes feel, it was simple and peaceful. Throwing off the covers, Madison grabbed her phone. A text notification from her mom flashed on the screen. "Mom, good morning, Maddie. Just checking in. Call us when you're up. We're so proud of you." The words brought a small smile to her face. They were proud of her, and she was proud of herself too. Breakfast conversations. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Clara chirped as Madison shuffled into the kitchen. The smell of syrup and butter made her stomach growl. "Morning," Madison replied with a small laugh, plopping into a chair at the kitchen table. Clara's parents were there too, setting plates down and pouring orange juice. Mrs. Adams turned to Madison with a kind smile. "How did you sleep, sweetheart?" "Really well, thank you," Madison said sincerely. "You'll need all the energy you can get for today," Clara said, grinning. "I have big plans for us. Park, ice cream, and then we're making that giant chocolate cake I told you about." Madison laughed. "That sounds perfect." As they ate breakfast, the conversation flowed easily. For once, no one asked her about politics, her parents, or what it was like to live in the White House. Mr. Adams asked about school, Mrs. Adams talked about the latest book she was reading, and Clara, being Clara, filled every pause with chatter about funny moments at school or stories about her cousins. Madison soaked it all in, feeling more normal than she had in months. It was refreshing, almost magical, to just be herself. A moment in the park. The park was alive with the sounds of children laughing, dogs barking, and birds calling from the trees. Madison and Clara walked along a shaded path, their shoes crunching against the gravel. "Tag, you're it!" Clara shouted suddenly, tapping Madison's arm before sprinting off. "Hey!" Madison yelled, laughing as she took off after her friend. For the next 10 minutes, they ran, shrieking and laughing like little kids, weaving between trees and dodging picnic benches. When they finally collapsed onto the grass, breathless and red-faced, Madison stared up at the sky, her chest heaving. It felt like freedom. For the first time, she wasn't worrying about expectations, responsibilities, or who people thought she was. "Madison," Clara said suddenly, propping herself up on one elbow. "Do you ever feel like you're not you? Like people just see you as someone else?" Madison turned her head to look at her. "All the time." Clara nodded knowingly. "I can't even imagine what it's like for you, with your dad being the president. It must be hard." "It is," Madison admitted softly. "Sometimes I feel like I have to be perfect. Like everyone's watching, waiting for me to mess up. And when I try to do something on my own, like yesterday, it's like people don't think I can handle it. It's frustrating because I know I can." "You can," Clara said firmly. "You proved that already. You just need to keep showing them." Madison blinked. "Keep showing them?" "Yeah. People might think they know you, but you get to decide who you really are. You'll show them over and over again, until they stop underestimating you." Madison stared at Clara, absorbing her words. Her friend was right. Madison didn't have to change other people's minds all at once. She just had to keep proving to herself that she could handle the challenges life threw at her. The rest would come in time. A call home. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house settled into quiet, Madison sat on the edge of the guest bed, her phone pressed to her ear. "Hi, Mom," she said when her mother picked up. "Hi, sweetheart. How was your day?" "It was great," Madison replied honestly. "We went to the park, ate ice cream, and baked a cake that didn't turn out too horrible." Her mother laughed. "That sounds like so much fun. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself." There was a pause, and then her mom's tone grew softer. "I've been thinking about what happened at the airport, Maddie. I know it must have been frustrating for you." "It was," Madison admitted. "But it was also important, I think. It made me realize that sometimes people will doubt me just because of who I am, and I can't change that. But I can still show them what I'm capable of." Her mother's voice warmed with pride. "That's exactly right, Madison. You are so much stronger than you know. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, but when you do, you'll do it with grace and strength, just like you always have." Madison smiled, the knot in her chest finally loosening. "Thanks, Mom." The journey home. 2 days later, Madison stood at the airport again, but this time she felt different. As she handed over her boarding pass, the gate agent smiled kindly and waved her through without hesitation. Madison walked down the jet bridge with her head high, her carry-on rolling smoothly behind her. She knew that some people would always see her as the president's daughter, but she also knew something they didn't. She was capable. She was resilient. And she was more than her last name. As she settled into her seat and watched the plane take off, she thought back to the challenges she had faced, being stopped at the gate, doubted, and underestimated. But she had stayed calm, trusted herself, and found strength in the process. Liam's words came back to her like an echo, small but strong. Underestimated but surprising everyone. Madison smiled to herself as the plane climbed higher into the clouds. She didn't need to be a superhero to prove her strength. She just needed to keep being herself, one step, one flight, one challenge at a time. And that's exactly what she planned to do.